Hello everybody, welcome to my WoW Classic TBC video. In this video, I'll be going through every class and covering every major raid contribution that they bring. I'll also be briefly discussing the playstyles of many specializations, some of which play out very differently than expected. There won't be any talk about leveling, nothing about what's new in TBC, and absolutely nothing PvP related. This will be strictly for endgame raiding. Near the end, I've got my suggested raid compositions, so the goal of this video is not for me to tell you what to build, it's for you to be able to make informed decisions, make your own compositions. So first off, let me briefly introduce myself. I am Farron, I'm an engineer, I work with numbers and spreadsheets all day. Optimizing processes is a major part of my job, and this carries over into my personal hobby, playing World of Warcraft. I like to build personal spreadsheets, work out optimal stat distributions, or whichever spec that I'm playing at the time. I've got an example of one right at the end of the video. So there's currently a lot of hype around TBC Classic, and there are a frenzy of videos being released on all sorts of topics. I'm making this resource because I found a lot of information gets left out from many of these videos, and I wanted to create sort of an encyclopedia that covers everything. With all that said, let's jump right into it. Here I'm going to show you a matrix of all the benefits. I'm not going to linger too long on this. You can study it if you want, but it's going to show up again at near the end of the video. So we got 6 archetypes in TBC. We have the tanks, your protection warriors, protection paladins, feral druids. You have your healers, priests, druids, shamans, paladins. You have your pure DPS classes. You can notice that these are also the top damage in WoW Classic. These are your warriors, rogues, and mages. You have your semi-support DPS classes, which are your warlocks and your hunters. And you have your pure support DPS, your priests, druids, shamans, and paladins. There's also some support healer builds. You can play a discipline priest or a deep balance restoration druid build that relies on healing touch a lot. So getting right into the druid, the first benefit here is Mark of the Wild. Gives a nice armor bonus and 19 primary stats to all. The 34 all resist sounds nice, but doesn't stack with any of the plus 70 resist auras like Paladin auras or Shaman totems. They give a Fairy Fire, which adds 610 armor penetration. With every other armor penetration buff or debuff on the boss, this comes out to about 4.43% physical damage. They also have Thorns. Thorns now, it's not a very high amount of damage, but when you're dealing with a warrior that can struggle on AoE tanking, this does help quite a bit. Druid's the only class with a battle res. It's on a 20-minute cooldown though, so you can't expect it to be up for every single boss pull. They have a 6-minute cooldown innervate. Using this on a priority class like a Shadow Priest or a Holy Priest, it's going to give them about 8,000 mana back. Very impactful. And of course druids can remove curses and remove poisons. So Bear and Cat both have Mangle, which provides a plus 30% bleed damage bonus. Mostly this is buffing only a Cat Druid, but classes like Warriors have Deep Wounds, and this buffs that, and rogues have a few bleeds themselves. So it benefits a few classes, but overall not too much. They also give a Leader of the Pack buff, which gives 5% physical crit to everybody in their group. And Bear Druids might want to spec into Improved Leader of the Pack. Gives out a small heal every time somebody gets a crit. Mostly it's pretty irrelevant, but for themselves, the small heal actually becomes quite large because they have a very high health pool. And of course Bear Druids have Bash and a Demoralizing Roar as well. I've got this kind of grayed background because it doesn't stack with Demoralizing Shout, and it's not as good, so won't really be using this much. Balanced Druids and the support restoration build that I was talking about can get improved Fairy Fire, which gives the entire raid a plus 3% physical hit. This is very valuable. Oftentimes people won't really notice that this is a thing. There's not really any text on the boss that notifies you that this is up, but everybody can drop 3% hit on their hit cap, and it benefits everybody a whole lot. And the balanced druids also have Boomkin aura, gives everybody a 5% spell crit buff. This is what most people think of when they think of balanced druids and their raid utility. It's certainly nice, but biggest thing here is the 3% physical hit. And balanced druids also have Insect Swarm. It gives a 2% miss chance to whatever enemy has Insect Swarm on it, but this doesn't stack with Scorpion Sting. Scorpion Sting is better at 5%. And Restoration Druids have the Tree of Life aura, which gives 25% to the Restoration Druid Spirit to received healing to anybody in their group. So this is the reason why you might want to stick Restoration Druids in your tank group. Looking at the Hunter. First off, Hunters have Hunter's Mark. It gives, with improved Hunter's Mark, 110 melee attack power, and fully buffed up, 440 range attack power. Something really important, you never want to let the buff fall off, because every time you have to reapply the Hunter's Mark, it will start back again at 110 attack power, and it's going to take a little bit of time to build this back up. So whichever Hunter has the debuff on the boss, they have to make sure that they reapply it. Other Hunters can't see the duration, so you just have to stay on top of that. Like I said before, Hunters have Scorpion Sting, gives 5% avoidance. It might not sound super important, but there's something on the crushing blows that bosses can do to tanks. If you give tanks 5% avoidance, then they can build more into threat. They don't have to go so crazy to build up as much dodge chance or anything to become uncrushable. Hunters also have Arcane Shot, which many people don't quite know, but it gives a magic purge at the 2.4.3 status of the spell. You might notice that on fights like Hiking Mulgar, where the mage is trying to spell steal the mana shield, an errant arcane shot can cause a wipe if you accidentally get rid of that shield. Hunters also have aim shot, gives a 50% healing reduction. Useful on some trash mobs, not particularly useful on bosses. And a big benefit that Hunters bring is they give misdirection. Depending on if the shot's crit or not, this can transfer up to 2k to 8k threat. Hunters also have Aspect of the Wild. Not used very often, but on some fights like Hydros, it's pretty useful. Beast Mastery, they have the notorious Ferocious Inspiration, gives a 3% damage buff, stacks with other Beast Mastery Hunters, can ramp up to a very high damage number. It's a very good group benefit. Marksmanship has True Shot aura, gives everybody 125 attack power in the group. Comparing this to the Beast Mastery plus 3% damage, early game, it's actually going to be slightly more than 3%, and late game, it will be slightly less. The nice thing about True Shot aura, in the Hunter group specifically, is it gives all the attack power to your pets as well, and it actually double dips a little bit because Hunter attack power translates into a small amount of pet attack power, so it gives your pet about 150 attack power rather than 125. Survival Hunters, big reason why they're brought to raid, they apply this exposed weakness buff, or debuff on the boss. In around tier 5 gear, you can expect this to be about 175 attack power to the entire raid. Very, very good. Looking at the Mage class. First off, Mage gives Arcane Intellect, plus 40 Intellect to everybody. There aren't a lot of casters that really rely on having a lot of Intellect, so it's not like the most important buff, but it's still 0.5% of a spell crit. Pretty good. They've got Amplify and Dampen Magic. Pretty situational. Some fights, there's no magic put out. You can apply Amplify Magic to everybody. Some fights, there's constant magic damage taken. You're going to want to put Dampen Magic. The minus healing is just something that healers are going to have to deal with. They have Spell Steal, useful on some fights, but overall doesn't get used too much. They just have a D Curse. They're only the only class that has a curse aside with Druids. And lots of fights where curses get put out, mages are gonna have to stop doing damage sometimes to make sure that they get the curses off the raid. And mages have the longest range interrupt at 30 yards with their counter spell, but it also has a very long cooldown. So any interrupt rotations, mage is not going to be in the rotation. They're more of a backup. Fire has improved Scorch talents. It gives plus 15% fire damage. Really, mages are the only ones that are going to be doing fire damage. You could think that there will be some fire destruction warlocks, but it's, as I'm going to cover later, it's just vastly inferior to the shadow destruction warlock. And the only other classes that are really going to be happy with this plus fire damage bonus are enhancement shamans who are going to use their fire elemental with the bloodlust. So not too impactful despite being a plus 15% damage buff. Frost gives Winter's Chill. It's a plus 10% Frost critical strike chance. No other class uses Frost, so this is only really buffing other mages that won't have to spec into this particular talent point. And Arcane Mages don't give any really fast buffs. They do have an additional 50% effectiveness to their Amplify and Dampen magics. Looking at the Paladin now. Every Paladin can get rid of the most things of any other class. They can get rid of curses, poison, and magic. And every Paladin has a Hammer of Justice stun. Going through the blessings, the first one is Blessing of Might. It gives plus 220 attack power. Retribution Paladins should have the points to be able to spec into improved Blessing of Might, which bumps this up to plus 264. Then there's Blessing of Wisdom. Base, it's plus 41, but Holy you can get 2 talent points, put it into this, and it will bring it up to plus 49 MP5. Blessing of Kings gives plus 10% to primary stats, very, very strong buff. And of course, Blessing of Salvation reduces threat by 30%. You're always going to want to have at least 3 Paladins in your raid group, because if you're, say, missing out on a Blessing of Might because you have to have Kings and Salvation, that's just so much attack power. It's even more impactful than the attack power that Survival Hunter gives you. Protection Paladins have Blessing of Sanctuary. It's mostly only useful on themselves. Even on other tanks it's not that much. It gives 80 damage taken reduction, and reflects some damage on block. Ret Paladins have Judgment to the Crusader, which increases the holy damage done to the boss by 219. Really high significant amount for whatever specs are doing holy damage, mostly your Protection Paladins and your Ret Paladins. And it gives out a full raid buff of 3% physical and spell crit. Very, very strong. And for the group buffs, they have Sanctity Aura, which gives 10% holy damage and 2% overall damage. And so stacking a group with a bunch of paladins in it is actually quite beneficial, because they can all have auras that buff the protection paladin quite a lot. Having a plus 10% holy damage buff on your protection paladin just gives them a lot of threat that quite often really needed. Now I have these 2 buffs here under Holy Paladin, but really any paladin can use it if you have a excess. This is your Judgment of Wisdom and Judgment of Light. The Judgment of Wisdom, doing some quick math on it, gives about 90 MP5, which is a very, very strong and very important buff to allow some specs viability. Some specs like Marksmanship Hunter are very mana hungry, and this basically allows them to be played. It gives them so much mana back. Same with Shadow Priest. Without this buff up, they're going to be having to run a lot of Spirit on their gear, which reduces their damage by quite a lot. And the Judgment of Light, it's a lot of healing per 5 on your entire raid, but if I had to pick, I would always have Judgment of Wisdom up. Going over to the auras, you have first off Devotion Aura, 861 armor, upgraded. It can go up to 1205 in the prot tree. You have your Retribution Aura, reflects 26 damage. Concentration Aura gives 35% pushback resistance, and if you spec into it as Holy, it can go up to 50%. This allows certain classes like Priest to have a 0% pushback chance with their own personal talents. And of course, Paladins have their resist auras to Fire, Frost, and Shadow. Looking at the Priest. Major buff, Power Word Fortitude, 103 stamina, very valuable. And Priest can dispel a whole lot of things. They got magic and disease basic dispels. Priest can also offensively dispel with their same skill to dispel magic. And they have a mass dispel, which does a AoE dispel on all targets within a certain radius. And a little bit more niche, Priests have the mind control. Certain mobs have very, very strong buffs that if you mind control them, you can apply the buffs to people in your party. So Holy Priests give no additional raid benefits. Going straight over to Discipline, first thing that they get is Power Infusion. Now this doesn't stack with Icy Veins, it doesn't stack with Bloodlust. It's not quite as good as it is in Classic, but if you organize it with some people in your group, it can be quite a nice damage bonus. And the main reason why you bring a Discipline Priest is for their Divine Spirit buff, and more specifically their improved Divine Spirit. When they have this, every class in your raid gets an additional 10% of their spirit as spell power. A lot of classes don't have a lot of spirit, so it's not super noticeable, but classes like your Shadow Priests, your Boomkins, your Mages, they're going to benefit from this greatly. And another more unnoticed thing about the Discipline tree is you can get their Mass Dispel down to 0.5 second cast and have a lower chance of getting resisted on it. Certain fights like, say, Shade of Aran, when he uses his AoE slow, if a Discipline Priest is in there to run their very fast cast Mass Dispel, everybody can get to the walls and start DPSing right away. Quite a big damage boost. So now Shadow Priests. They give out Vampiric Touch, Vampiric Embrace, full group mana regen and health regen. Adds up to quite a lot. Now there's actually quite a few classes that can't even spend enough mana to go below this 200 MP5 rate. So Shadow Priest is very, very valuable, save people a lot of mana potions, and if they're stuck in a DPS group, a lot of classes will be able to use destruction potions rather than having to spam mana potions. And now Shadow Priests also have the Misery talent, gives out a 5% raid-wide magic damage buff, and they have Shadow Weaving, which is a raid-wide 10% shadow damage buff. Very, very important to have at least one Shadow Priest. Looking in now at the Rogue. Rogue has Exposed Armor. It gives a lot of armor penetration at 3075. Now, without Exposed Armor compared to with, that's a 22.33% physical damage buff, which is 4% better than a 5-stack Sunder Armor. Rogues also give Wound Poison and Mind Numbing Poison. It's not too useful on a lot of bosses, but a lot of trash has some very dangerous spells, and Mind Numbing Poison actually works on a lot of trash. It can give you a lot of time to get kicks in or stop the cast from going through. Rogues also have melee range interrupt on a short cooldown, and they have on-demand kidney shot stun. The only actual other benefit that rogues bring is Subtlety has Hemo, adds physical damage that the target takes, but overall, really not much going for rogues. Now Shamans have a lot of group buffs that they can put out. Shamans have Poison and Disease Cleanse, they all have Purge, and they have Earthshock, which is the shortest cooldown interrupt, and it has a 20-yard range. There is one thing though, there's always an inherent 1% chance of getting resisted on your spells, so a little bit unreliable, but for the most part, Shamans can take care of all the interrupts that are needed. And Shamans bring a Bloodlust, 30% haste for 40 seconds to everybody in their group. Going through the totems, first off, Strength of Earth, 86 Strength, enhanced in spec to improve weapon totems and improve earth totems, I believe, and that goes up to plus 99 with the proper talent points. Restoration Shamans can also go down into this tree and pick this up. Very valuable, good buff to have. We got the Mana Spring Totem, which equals out to plus 50 MP5, and spec'd into Resto, this can go up to plus 62.5 MP5. All Shamans have Grace of Air Totem, base 77 Agility, with the same talent upgrade as the Strength of Earth Totem. This goes up to plus 89. And Shamans have Wind Fury Totem. On average, a group with Wind Fury Totem, a melee group, will be doing about 8 to 10% additional damage. And all Shamans have Wrath of Air Totem, which is 101 spell power. I put down here plus 121 for Elemental Shamans. Reason here is that Elemental Shaman tier 4 2-set bonus is very strong. It gives an additional 20 spell power to this totem, and your Shamans are going to be running this tier 4 2-set bonus for a long time because of that. Shamans also have the resist totems for the Fire, Frost, Nature, and if they really need to, they have Tranquil Air Totem. It does stack with Blessing of Salvation, an additional minus 20% threat. Elemental Shamans also have Totem of Wrath, which is on the Fire Totem spot, which doesn't overlap with any of their other buffs, so they give out an additional 3% spell crit and spell hit to their group. Quite valuable. Enhancement Shamans have the Storm Strike. Now while this buff is up, the boss will take an additional 20% nature damage, but there's only 2 stacks of this, and 2 instances of nature damage, direct damage I should say, will take off a stack, and a lot more things do direct damage than the Enhancement Shaman might think. Stuff like Hunter Pet using a Lightning Breath takes off a stack of your Storm Strike. Something like a Rogue Poison, Instant Poison, takes off a stack of your Storm Strike. So, if you want to maximize your damage from this, you're going to have to work it out with your Rogues and Hunters. Make sure that they're not taking off this buff with low damage spells, because all your other nature dots are going to be ticking higher while this buff persists, and usually it gets ripped off almost right away. Enhancement Shamans also give out a plus 10% melee attack power buff every time they crit, which is very often, so this is pretty much 100% uptime, and this goes out to everybody in their group. Restoration Shamans have Mana Tide Totem, gives back 24% of your maximum mana to everybody in the group. So Warlocks. Warlocks are a very high damage class, and they also bring out a lot of utility. There's a reason why everybody says that Warlocks are very good classes. Is a very good class. Starting out, they have Curse of the Elements, gives a plus 10% to Fire, Frost, Arcane, and Shadow damage, notably leaving out Nature. They also have Curse of Recklessness, gives 800 armor pen, adds up to 5.81% physical damage increase. So very important to note that how good this buff is, because a lot of your Warlocks, they're going to want to get greedy. They don't want to be adding physical damage. They want to be putting up their own Curse of Doom, but this is a very, very, very strong spell. Warlocks also have 3 levels of Hellstones. You can carry 1 of each if they talent 0, 1, or 2 points into improve Hellstone. Now, Affliction Warlocks have the Malediction talent, which brings the buff of the Curse of the Elements from 10% up to 13%. This comes out to 2.7% damage increase. And your Affliction Warlocks also have the ability to keep out an imp. All your other Warlocks are going to have their demons sacrificed. Your Affliction Warlock will not go that deep into the demonology tree, so they can have a pet out, they can have blood packed up. Gives out 86 additional stamina to everybody in your group. Good reason to put them in your tank group. Warlocks also have the talent Shadow Embrace. Gives a 5% debuff, enemy damage debuff. Helps a little bit with your tank survivability, but you're gonna compare this to the Scorpion Sting that Hunter gives out. The avoidance is actually quite a lot better because, like I said before, tank doesn't have to go quite as far to become uncrushable, whereas this 5% enemy damage, like, it doesn't add to the percentage of towards uncrushable. It's just a nice 5% reduction. And your Affliction Warlocks also have Fire Shield. It's an imp spell. They can use it on whoever. If you stick it on tank, it's a nice additional reflect damage. Demonology Warlocks have an on-demand stun, but it's tied into their pet, so they'd have to macro it to make proper use of it. You're not going to see it too much, but it is there. And your Demonology and Destruction Warlocks are going to be spec'd into improved Shadow Bolt, and later on actually your Affliction Warlocks too. And this adds a 5 stack buff, which increases shadow damage taken on the boss by plus 20%. And a common misunderstanding with this is that you might think that only direct damage spells get this plus 20% when a stack is reduced, but in reality, all shadow damage that the boss takes while this is up is increased by 20%. So Warlocks with improved Shadow Bolt actually give more shadow damage than a Shadow Priest does. It's very, very good. This is why you don't want to run Fire Destruction Warlocks, because Shadow applies this debuff, and it is so important. When I said about the Affliction Warlocks getting the improved Shadow Bolt, eventually just UA and your Siphon Life and everything doesn't scale as well with spell power as the Shadow Bolt spec, so you're going to move away from that build. You're going to go all the way, make sure you get your Malediction talent, and you're going to go straight into Destruction Tree. You can go all the way down to Ruin for your additional crit damage, and you just put up Corruption, Curse of the Elements, and Shadow Bolt like all the other Warlocks. Looking at Warrior now. Warrior has Sunder Armor. Like I said before, it doesn't stack with Exposed Armor that Rogues can put on, and it's 4% less physical damage taken. However, when Exposed Armor is up, your Protection Warrior cannot use Devastate. It won't actually even allow him to use it. If your Warrior is using a slow weapon, that means that his threat output is going to be significantly hindered. But if your Warrior is using a fast weapon, is able to get Heroic Strike every single time, keep the rage down, they're not really going to care too much about not being able to use Devastate. So depending on what your prop warrior is using, you might want to not be using the Exposed Armor and use the Sunder Armor instead. Warriors can also bring Battle Shout and Commanding Shout. It's fairly easy to get the improved shouts. It's very early in the Fury tree, so your warriors can buff your melee attack power by 381 and buff your group's health by 1350. They also have Pummel. It's the exact same as a Rogue Kick, melee range interrupt with a 10-second cooldown. And warriors have Thunderclap, reduces the enemy attack speed by 10%, which is underrated and very good. And they have Demoralizing Shout, which reduces enemy attack power by 420. Normally, you might think 420 isn't very much, especially when a lot of classes can have up to 3000 attack power, but boss attack power doesn't quite work the same way. They don't have very much attack power, and 420 reduces the total damage dealt by a lot more than what 420 reduction from a player would be. Arms Warriors give an additional 4% physical damage debuff to the boss, so everybody in the group, all your hunters, all your melees, they're going to be doing significantly more damage with the Arms Warrior in the group. And they also bring Mortal Strike, healing reduction debuff. Only class to have this, aside with your rogues and your hunters, and it's easily applied. And Protection Warriors can take Improved Thunderclap, brings that 10% reduced enemy attack speed up to 20%. Very, very strong. Important to keep up on the boss all times. And Protection Warriors also have on-demand stun with their concussion blow. So looking at other items that exist, not specific to specs here, we got the Annihilator, still exists in TBC, never got nerfed, gives an additional 600 armor pen. This comes out to 4.55% extra physical damage. If you're going to be min-maxing, bringing all your right classes to fill out your raid comp and not use the Annihilator, there's not really any point to doing all the other min-maxing, because this buff is, I mean, it's even better than bringing an Arms Warrior to your raid. So important to keep this up. You can give this to your Protection Warrior, you can give this to your Enhanced Shaman, you can give this to Fury Warrior, as long as they maintain the buff. The buff does have a very long duration, so they can use other weapons in the meantime when they're not refreshing it. But very good item to use. It's actually good to have on a lot of people in your raid, so that you can make sure that this buff stays up. Now, Leatherworkers have three sets of drums. Drums of Battle is the very, very good one. Gives 5.1% spell haste and 7.6% physical haste. Very OP, and a lot of guilds are going to try and stack 4 Leatherworkers just to keep this up at all times. But even still, it's important and valuable. If you have a 5th Leatherworker in the group, you can add on Drums of War, which gives a 60 attack power and 30 spell power buff, and it stacks with the Drums of Battle, so you can have both these buffs up at the same time. So lots of people are going to be going leatherworking, even healers, even spellcasters, even clothies. It's quite a good buff. And you also have Drums of Restoration, gives a small amount of mana and health regen. Certain fights like Kazragal, these are very useful, keeps your mana high. Now, these 3 necklaces, Eye of the Night, Chain of the Twilight Owl, and Braided Eternium Chain, they all give very good group buffs, but they require the user to keep this necklace on. So Eye of the Night is good for caster DPS and gives your entire group 34 spell power. This is extremely strong. If you think about it, everybody in your group getting 34 spell power, like, this neck could have no stats on it and still be worth using. Chain of the Twilight Owl, it's really good on prot paladins, but other classes can sacrifice their own damage and wear this to get their group a 2% spell crit. And Braided Eternium Chain is used on physical DPS, and it gives a little bit less crit. It gives plus 1.27% physical crit, but this necklace isn't even bad without the group buff. Now, the thing with these is there's a certain amount of charges, I believe 10 charges on each neck, so you're going to have to constantly be getting new ones, constantly going building through them. It gets very expensive, but if you're looking to min-max, these are very, very strong. They also have a 30-minute duration on a 1-hour cooldown, so if you want to have the buff up at all times, you're going to have multiple people in your group with this neck that have it equipped for one fight, and then somebody else, like Ellie Shaman has this neck, uses it. After the half hour is up, they switch out to their other necklace, and the Boomkin can come in and use this necklace just to keep this buff up. Engineers have the Gnomish Battle Chicken, which sometimes gives out a 5% physical haste buff to their group. It's pretty unreliable and it has no stats on it, so they lose out on a trinket slot. I personally don't like this item. And if you're playing Alliance, you can have Draenei in your group. They give out a 1% physical and spell hit buff. So here I've got the overview of the matrix. Pretty much every single spec is viable with the right items. Certain specs like Marksmanship Hunter become viable with Paladin using their Judgment of Wisdom, and they can also run like a mana trinket to keep themselves actually viable with the damage. They can keep up with Beast Mastery Hunters. There's also some classes that are pretty mana hungry that can run alchemy stones, and if they're chugging mana potions, it gives out a lot more mana. So you can pretty much play any spec even if they're very mana hungry. Here I've got some sample raid comps. First one is for tank survival. This is maximizing tank buffs for keeping them alive. This includes putting the Infliction Warlock in the group, putting a Restoration Druid in their group, and a Protection Paladin for Devotion Aura. All the other groups, pretty standard. You're going to have your Hunter group, you're going to have your Melee group, your Warlock group, and in this case, your Mage doesn't really get too many buffs. They're just going to be sitting down in the Healer group with a Shadow Priest. If you're looking for maximum damage, you're going to stick your melees in with your Prot Warrior, and you're going to build a group around your Arcane Mages with the Shadow Priest and Protection Paladin in there with them. This way, your Protection Paladin gets mana back, which if they're not the main tank, they will have some mana struggles. Very valuable to have a Shadow Priest in there giving them mana back. And you'll also stick your Survival Hunter, unfortunately not with the Shaman, so he's not getting the Grace of Air buff to improve his exposed weakness, but you can just stick your Survival Hunter in with the healers. And here's another sample of a group that might run without a rogue, because your Protection Warrior wants to be using Devastate, can't maintain his threat with just Heroic Strikes. I've got a lot of buff characters, or buff classes, like Balanced Druid and Affliction Warlocks in these raid comps. But something important to notice is you don't want to go overboard on just buffing your characters. For example, if a Balanced Druid isn't keeping up about 60% of the damage of a Destruction Warlock, then it's worth just bringing a 4th Destruction Warlock instead of the Balanced Druid. Likewise for an Affliction Warlock, they're not going to be able to keep up with about 85% of the damage of a Mage or a Destruction Warlock. It's not worth really bringing that spec either. A lot of these percent bonuses can help, but sometimes just having throughput is more important. Also, in some fights, you could have, like, for example, a Beast Mastery Hunter where their pet has a lot of movement, or there's some very unfriendly pet mechanics, like Alar comes to mind, or the Lurker Below. Marksmanship will outperform, or just taking additional casters is better than running 3 Beast Mastery Hunters in that case. Also notable is that I don't have a 5th Shaman in with the healer group. Ideally you want as many Shamans as you can get, but being realistic, you're probably not going to be able to have 5 Shamans in your raid because they're going to be under high demand from every single guild on the server. I have put in a Holy Priest instead of a Restoration Shaman in the healer group because there's going to be a lot of priests looking for raid spots, and Holy Priests are actually very good raid healers with Circle of Healing. It's not that bad having a lack of a Restoration Shaman in your healer group. It's really up to the guilds. These are just samples, and you can run with pretty much anything in TBC, especially if the numbers aren't overtuned. So work out what you want to run. So this is my final slide. I've got an example spreadsheet This one is my Marksmanship Hunter. I played Marksmanship Hunter quite a lot, and here's all the math behind it. It's a little complicated, but I built this for a whole bunch of different specs. You can see all this has gone into my decisions for talking about the different specs and which ones I would recommend running. And I might make some videos in the future for individual classes and specs, playstyles, and all the different stat values that I've calculated. So, thanks for watching.